Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll look into a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with today's grilling of DHS Secretary Kristi Noem before the House Homeland Security Committee, following scathing criticism of her from Republicans on the Senate Homeland Security Committee. Joining us to assess whether apparent lies she told about her alleged boyfriend Corey Lewandowski not signing contracts could lead to her impeachment is John Nichols, The Nation magazine's Washington correspondent. His books include The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party, The Enduring Legacy of Henry Wallace's Anti-Fascist, Anti-Racist Politics, and his latest article at The Nation is This is an Unnecessary, Unauthorized, and Unconstitutional War. And he has another article at the Capital Times we will discuss. The movement to impeach Kristi Noem has begun. Then we'll go to Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan to speak with Wladimir van Wilgenburg, a journalist and political analyst specializing in issues concerning Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey, with a particular focus on Kurdish politics. He has covered several major battles against ISIS in northern Syria and Iraqi Kurdistan, among other subjects, and his latest book, based on first-hand research and interviews conducted on the ground in Iraqi Kurdistan and northern Syria, is The Kurds of Northern Syria, Governance, Diversity and Conflicts. We will investigate reports that the CIA is arming Kurdish Iranian militias to attack IRGC forces in Iran's northwest and to provide sanctuary for Iranians fleeing their brutal and murderous government. Then finally we'll get an update on reports that Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the recently killed supreme leader with deep ties to the IRGC, has been anointed as Iran's new theocratic leader. Joining us is Mohsen Milani, the executive director of the World Center for Strategic and Diplomatic Studies and professor of politics at the University of South Florida. Professor Milani has served as a fellow at Harvard, Oxford, and Foscari University in Italy, and is the author of The Making of Iran's Islamic Revolution. His latest book is Iran's Rise and Rivalry with the U.S. in the Middle East. And before we begin at the start of this new year, which will culminate in the fateful midterm elections in November, polls already indicate MAGA Republicans will lose the House and possibly the Senate. But we're up against a Trump-Miller presidency already drunk with power, and they will do anything to stay in power, having already demonstrated their contempt for the United States Constitution with Trump's January 6, 2001 coup attempt. They see over half of the country as their enemy and have a private army of loyal thugs ready to round up critics of the regime they label as communist lunatics. As Trump cowers the media and his cronies buy up the mainstream press, Background Briefing will continue to expose this malevolent regime's fascistic machinations, providing a daily insight into the news as a massive coalition of people power is mobilized to bring about an end to this nightmare and usher in a new era of reform not seen since Nixon departed the presidency in disgrace. To help save America's 250-year-old democracy, we need all hands on deck, and you can make a tax-deductible donation to help us do our part at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at publictruthmedia.org. And thank you. And joining us now, John Nichols, who is The Nation magazine's Washington correspondent. His books include The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party, The Enduring Legacy of Henry Wallace's Anti-Fascist, Anti-Racist Politics. And his latest article at The Nation is This is an Unnecessary, Unauthorized, and Unconstitutional War. And he has a recent article at the Capital Times, The Movement to Impeach Kristi Noem has begun. Welcome to Background Briefing, John Nichols.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us, John. And Kristi Noem's testimony before the Senate was pretty devastating, with Senator Tom Tillis absolutely ripping her apart over killing a dog, a little puppy, and a goat. And he really, I thought, just absolutely devastated her. Today's hearings before the House Homeland Security Committee seem a lot more partisan. Some mild criticism from Kevin Carley out here in California, a Republican who's very vulnerable because of redistricting. So I think he may well be an extinct creature. But the long and the short of it is, ostensibly, she's gone to the Congress to ask them to fund the Department of Homeland Security, her department. And the Democrats don't want to fund a department that's killing American citizens and behaving in a rogue and criminal way. But the Republicans are now arguing that because of this war against Iran, we have vulnerabilities to cyber attacks, etc. So where do you think this thing is going to work out in between the Republicans' call for defending us against Iran versus the Democrats' call to say, this is our moment to rein in this rogue agency?
Right. I mean, the Republicans are kind of looking for any argument they can find for justifying unimaginable new amounts of spending on an agency that is already so overwhelmingly well funded that they barely know what to do with all their money. So it's this bizarre situation, Ian, where they seem to want to constantly pile up more money in DHS. And I think it obviously is primarily for hiring of a lot more ICE agents and other agents associated with the many kind of agencies that are within the entity, and also their incredibly expensive use of various technologies, which they try to be on the cutting edge of, but aren't always. And finally, the lavish lifestyle of the secretary, it seems, at least if the criticisms and reports are accurate. And so you are seeing here a kind of a classic situation in the current Congress. The Democrats are looking for ways to justify not putting any more money into something that is, of course, called Department of Homeland Security. Right. And so it's hard because people have been taught over time to think, well, Homeland Security must be pretty important. So you probably should throw some money that way. It's similar to when we used to call the Department of Defense, and people thought, well, that's not a bad idea. Now we call it war. And I think people may be more skeptical, I hope. But bottom line is, for the Democrats, I think, have developed a real spine on this. Not all of them, but most of them. And they've become conscious of the fact that the American people are very, very troubled by the way that DHS operates. And so they're sympathetic to the idea of, holding the line. And you see that in the questioning, in the character of these sessions. There is a much stronger line of questioning than I think you would have seen even a year ago or certainly in the past. And that's rooted in the real experience of folks watching what has happened in Los Angeles, in Chicago, in Minneapolis, especially in Minneapolis. And there's just a deep discomfort with this agency. The last thing I'll say about it, of course, is that by and large, you're running along partisan lines. And so you get to that deeper question of how many Republicans might move over and ultimately side with the Democrats on issues related to DHS and especially ICE. And we know that there's some that will, or at least we have a good sense. Tom Tillis telegraphed that, very bluntly in the Senate hearing. But the Republicans still have marginal advantage in the House. It's very, very closely divided. And in the Senate, a little bit better advantage, but not overwhelming. And so where one or two members go becomes a really big deal. And that's one of the kind of, subtler reasons why we're watching these hearings, is to kind of get a sense of where people might line up.
Well, in terms of an impeachment, obviously you need some Republicans in the House in particular. That's where the impeachment is generated, and the trial is in the Senate. Maybe the Senate might actually be more hopeful than the House.
Well, and the problem is in the Senate, you've got to get to a 2/3.
Right.
So
exactly.
At the end of the day, your action on impeachment, if there is movement toward impeachment, and I will tell you that you have a very large sign-on, one of the largest sign-ons in history for an impeachment resolution in the House. I think it's over 180, well over 180. So the vast majority of the Democratic caucus has signed on. If the Democrats were able to hold their caucus together, keep everybody on board for an impeachment of Kristi Noem, which became a kind of a live movement, an active movement after some of the horrific events up in Minneapolis, particularly the shootings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. They would be close to the range of where they need to be, because you just need a majority in the House in order to achieve, an impeachment. And so they just need a couple Republicans to come across. At this point, that's not a wildly unreasonable prospect, but certainly a difficult one. When you get to the Senate, that notion of getting 2/3 vote for removal from office becomes a lot harder. But remember, and I think we've discussed this before, Ian, as somebody who's written a book about impeachment, I've always held to the view that the simple act of impeaching is very important. It is an accountability action, an accountability measure. We have seen presidents of the United States, or one president of the United States, resign rather than be impeached. That was Nixon. We've seen others, obviously, respond in different ways to it. But I do think that it's meaningful that there are folks trying at this point to impeach Kristi Noem.
So it seems the ammunition, though, is pretty strong, and that is that she lied to the Senate, according to ProPublica's work. She said that Corey Lewandowski, her boyfriend, who is a non-paid person, who knows what his official title is, it doesn't matter, he's running the place behind the scenes. And she said that he's never signed a contract. Well, apparently there's evidence that he has signed contracts. And also earlier on, ProPublica revealed that her chief of staff's husband had been the beneficiary of this $200 million ad buy that's running through his fingers. So she's a part of the Trump Kakistocracy, the clown car cabinet, who just dress up. They can't do the job, but they dress up in costumes like she does, like Kash Patel does, and like Pete Hegseth does. It is so embarrassing to watch these clowns. I don't know where to begin, John. It is just, again, the Kakistocracy, the rule of the very worst.
Well, I don't know, what the relationship is between Noem and Lewandowski. There's a lot of speculation about that, and people, saying what they'll say. But the bottom line is that I think it's quite clear that the Department of Homeland Security has been under a sort of a bizarre leadership in this second Trump term, and it isn't just that the agency has had all sorts of controversies and scandals and financial questions asked. It is also just sort of the basic priorities, the out front priorities, to spend unimaginable amounts of money on advertising that features the secretary of this particular cabinet agency, on television advertising and all sorts of other promotions. In and of itself is surreal, right? It doesn't make sense to go to that level of spending. I know that, look, I've covered politics for a long time. I've seen political figures and agencies put the faces of particular figures on billboards and other things. I know that happens. I understand. And I don't even particularly object, because sometimes the leader of an agency is good at explaining what they do. But when you're getting into hundreds of millions of dollars, I mean, something way weirder is going on, and something I think quite troubling. Beyond that, though, when you start to talk about priorities, they're supposed to be an agency that would, obviously because of their arguments as regards to the importance of what they do, would be interacting at a very clear, very effective level with state and local government across the country. That's not the case. They're often in conflict with state and local government, and have made minimal efforts to cooperate, even in incredibly serious issues, like the investigations in Minnesota. Finally, I think that we have to be conscious of the fact that this agency has responded to very serious events, right? Literally, the shooting and killing of people in Minneapolis and in other places, the deaths of people in other places at the hands of their agents, and has not cooperated with at a baseline with investigations into those incidents. That's problem one. Problem two, in many cases, there's been a kind of like an outlandish, wild effort to rush to microphones and characterize people who have been shot and killed as domestic terrorists, right? As something that the the people who know these folks, their families, and others say, the evidence says is not the case. And so, at some fundamental level, you have just a lot of kind of red flags as regards DHS. And I think that is why Tom Tillis, interestingly a Republican, has been so bluntly outspoken about the agency. And I think it's notable.
Right, and of course, the senator from Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar, did question Noem vigorously about what she said about Alex Preddy being a domestic terrorist, along with Renee Good. And it came up, of course, again today in the House hearing before the House Homeland Security Committee. But Kristi Noem literally parrots what Stephen Miller has written for her. I mean, when I say Lewandowski runs DHS, well, it's really Stephen Miller that runs DHS. And she follows his script. And it looks like she followed his script again today, because she was asked about the chief federal judge in Minnesota, who said that ICE and CBP have violated nearly 100 court orders, including the fact that ICE and CPB apparently have been stealing the money from the people that they arrest and take away their passports and take away their jewelry. I mean, this is a criminal organization we're talking about. This is petty crime, along with, capital crime, murdering people. And what does Kristi Noem say? She says that it's common knowledge that we have activist judges out there throwing opinions around. I mean, again, all they can do is, troll and parrot right-wing talking points.
Well, and look, it's not so overly shocking that they would parrot right-wing talking points, but there's one thing when you are, campaigning effectively, right? When you're trying to present an idea, present some vision of what you're trying to do, and in our politics today, you can get pretty over the top and do. But there's something else when you're actually at the investigatory level, right? When you're talking about a shooting, when you're talking about an incident, something that you want to get the facts on. And the truth is that the agency has presented itself as increasingly unreliable. Now, as best I know, I think that Kristi Noem and Corey Lewandowski deny having a relationship, or at least say that's not the case. And you also have people saying, there's the argument that Noem is clearly in charge of the agency and stuff like that. And yet, you see so much evidence that whoever is kind of pulling the strings, right? Whoever's in charge here is just doing a horrible job. The way that they approach things does not build confidence in the agency. It doesn't build confidence in the rule of law or in the fairness of how they approach things. And for an agency that is so massively funded, that is so powerful, and that has such an impact on the lives of so many people, we have a right to expect better as a country, right? We simply have a right to say, this shouldn't be run the way it is. And if that's right, if we accept that, then the notion of a change in leadership becomes particularly attractive. And I think this is the bottom line. There are a lot of reasons that you might impeach Kristi Noem, and obviously the nation's made an argument for that. But at a more fundamental level, it isn't about the individual. It is about the agency. This agency is being badly run. That's what Tom Tillis says. That's what a lot of other people are saying. And if that is the case, if the agency is being badly run, then, if the person who's in charge will not step down, or if the president will not ask for a resignation, then it becomes the duty of Congress to step up and to say, look, there has to be different leadership here.
Well, John Nichols, I thank you for joining us, and we will wait for that shoe to drop, and I appreciate you joining us here today.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Ian. I appreciate the conversation.
Well, thank you. And again, I've been speaking with John Nichols, who is the Nation magazine's Washington correspondent. His books include The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party, The Enduring Legacy of Henry Wallace's Anti-Fascist, Anti-Racist Politics, and his latest article at The Nation is This is an Unnecessary, Unauthorized and Unconstitutional War. And he has another article at the Capital Times, The Movement to Impeach Kristi Noem Has Begun. We're going to take a brief station break. We're back and go to Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan to investigate reports that the CIA is arming Kurdish Iranian militias to attack IRGC forces in Iran's northwest and to provide sanctuary for Iranians fleeing their brutal and murderous government.
Everybody loves cowboys and clowns. Just a little while, but when the goodbyes are said and the spotlight goes dead, there's no one left who cares to hang around to love the cowboys and clowns.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now from Erbil in Kurdistan is Wladimir van Wilgenburg, who is a journalist and political analyst specializing in issues concerning Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey, with a particular focus on Kurdish politics. He has covered several major battles against ISIS in northern Syria and Iraqi Kurdistan, among other subjects, and his latest book, based on first-hand research and interviews conducted on the ground in Iraqi Kurdistan and northern Syria, is The Kurds of Northern Syria, Governance, Diversity, and Conflicts. Welcome to Background Briefing, Wladimir van Wilgenburg.
Thank you so much.
So what is going on now in Kurdistan in terms of reports that the CIA is arming Kurdish resistance fighters to get involved in maybe destabilizing the Iranian government? My understanding is that Iran has already sent troops to that region. So is this another front in the many wars that the Kurds have been fighting?
Well, I think personally that these reports are a little bit exaggerated by the CNN and other outlets and Reuters, that they, for instance, they are talking that they're receiving arms and support. I think what happened is that there have been several meetings with Kurdish parties, with U.S. intelligence, but it could also be like special operators, and that they're offering. These meetings are meant to like offer options to the Trump administration to give him alternatives in this war, because you cannot win a war just with only air support. I mean, they have been very effective. Israel and the U.S., they control the airspace in Iran. But the issue is there's no one on the ground to make any changes. So unless they go for like a Venezuela-style kind of imposition of like an imposed government on with still regime officials, or they can go for a complete regime change. If they go for a complete regime change, it's very difficult to do anything if you don't have sort of a safe zone in a part of Iran where, for instance, people can flee to, and where they can build like a new Iranian army. Because I don't think the Revolutionary Guard will do like what, for instance, the Shah did in 1979, to just step on a plane and just leave the country. Of course, it can always happen, but I mean, it's not just, the thing is already Khamenei now is dead, and we have seen that the system is still ongoing. There's still daily attacks. I'm here in Erbil. Just 30 minutes ago, there was like debris from like drone shutdown was falling on a Christian chapel here in Ankara. And also Iranian Kurds, they have been hit by ballistic missiles today, and one person was killed and 3 were injured. So the situation is very fragile, and Iran is still able to mount attacks, both missiles and drones. So we have to see how the situation will develop. And that's why I think they are talking to Kurds. But I've talking to Iranian Kurdish leaders, and they said there's no decision yet to enter, although there's a lot of speculation on the ground. Oh, tomorrow they go, no, the day after tomorrow they go. But on the ground, like in practical terms, like until now, they didn't go yet, but they're ready in case.
So how tense or fraught are the relations between the Kurds, and particularly Iranian Kurds, and the theocratic government there? Because I recall when there was the uprising, the Women Life Freedom Uprising, it was sparked by the religious authorities, the morality police, as they call themselves in Iran, killing a young Kurdish woman. And that sparked an enormous protest where women took to the streets. And of course, it was brutally put down, as was the recent protests.
Yeah, well, basically since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, the Islamic Republic, they have executed a lot of Kurds that are politically involved. I mean, Kurdish parties, they're all branded as terrorist organizations. There's no any space for any politics. I mean, there are some Kurds in the Iranian parliament, but the only Kurds that are allowed that work inside the system of the Islamic Republic that follow the teachings of Khamenei. So it's a very religious system. There's no space for any Kurdish political participation. And during also the Masha Amini protest, the Jina Amini protest a few years ago, there were many Kurds who were arrested and executed and imprisoned. Now also recently, during the last protest wave, I must say the protest wave was not so much in the Kurdish area. There was one big strike called by the Kurdish political parties. But there were a lot of protests, though, in Kermanshah and in Ilam, which actually are Shia Kurds. So it's actually, I mean, there's a lot of repression, state repression against the Kurdish population. But also the interesting thing is that the Kurds, they have a history of armed insurgency against the Iranian state. For instance, the Kurds also had an independent Kurdish republic supported by the Soviets in 1946, I think. But it only survived for around 11 months when the Soviets pulled out their support. So they have this whole history. They have a very long history. And also in 1979, they controlled Kurdish areas for a certain time until they were pushed out by the Islamic Republic. So yeah, they have this experience. And also what's interesting to note is that some of this Kurdish group, they fought with support of the US against ISIS. For instance, you have a Kurdish group called PAK. They fought ISIS with support of coalition forces. And also you have Iranian Kurds that were with the SDF in Syria. Those Kurds, they have experience with drone warfare. So these people can also come back and help the Kurdish coalition that was recently formed. So there's a new Kurdish coalition formed from several Kurdish parties. Now, today, another Kurdish group joined this coalition, which consists of 6 parties. And these Kurdish parties, I mean, there's a lot of media that are always saying, oh, they're separatists, but they are not separatists. They want autonomy and a secular, democratic, federal Iran. So they don't want to separate from Iran, as some people say. There was a lot of discussions between the monarchist movements and the Kurdish movement, but they don't want to separate from Iran. And this group are preparing basically to enter. And these are the groups that reportedly President talked to, although there have never been any confirmation from the White House that Trump talked to Iranian Kurdish leaders, but there was some reporting in the local Kurdish media about it, and also CNN reported that. But so far it's been not confirmed that actually Trump spoke with Iranian Kurdish leaders, but he did speak with Kurdish leaders in Iraq.
So what is the existing military situation vis-a-vis the Iranian Kurdish militias? Do they have they been active, as you suggested? There's a history there. Are they armed, and are they trained, and what kind of numbers are we talking about? This is, assuming that the CIA starts arming them with probably more modern weapons, I imagine. But what's your understanding about their numbers?
Well, I mean, these groups are not like, it's not like that they're like in the hundreds of thousands of fighters. I mean, it's like there's not like exact numbers of these groups. Some people talk about 1,500 fighters, some talk about even more. So it's difficult to say how many they are, but they have experience in fighting ISIS, and also some of them they fought Iranian-backed militia groups in 2017, like PAK, for instance. And you have other Kurdish groups, and they have a long history. So I think personally, if, for instance, these groups will get air support from the US and from Israel, and for instance, there will be operators on the ground from coalition countries like the US, I think these groups could easily take out the IRGC on the border areas of Western Iran. And then this area could provide like to be like a sort of a safe haven for the Iranian opposition to organize from and then to move further into non-Kurdish areas. But the Kurdish groups don't have an interest to march on Tehran. They are Iranian Kurdish opposition parties, but they don't want to create this kind of notion that a Kurdish group will go to a non-Kurdish areas, and then you get this kind of same problems we saw also in Syria when the Kurds in Syria were pushed by the US to go to Arab areas like Deir ez-Zor, Raqqa. So they want to avoid this kind of issues what they had in Syria, and they're working on this basically. So I think personally that these groups, because they have experience already with fighting ISIS, they have experience with the coalition. Probably they already had some meetings with coalition military leaders from different coalition countries. So I think they could play like a role in creating a safe haven. But I do not think like even then you still need Iranian opposition for the rest of the country. I mean, it cannot just be only the Kurds. So there's also efforts, I think, in the background that people are trying to create coalitions between the different Iranian opposition parties. But so far, it has been very difficult to unite them. We haven't seen something like that, what we saw, for instance, with the Iraq war, when before the US attack against the Ba'ath regime of Saddam Hussein, that you had all these different opposition groups joining a conference in the UK.
So, Wladimir, you're in Erbil in Kurdistan, which of course is landlocked in the north of Iraq, with Turkey on one side and Iran on the other, and Syria as well. And what kind of presence have you seen of anybody that would resemble a U.S. delegation or a CIA covert group? And I wonder how they would get weaponry into the country. Because the Turks are not going to cooperate, are they?
Well, I mean, it's just until now, I don't think there's been any weaponry sent to the Iranian Kurds. I mean, there's the Erbil airport here in the Kurdistan region. So technically speaking, they could bring in weapons. But I mean, they also did that with the Syrian Kurds. For instance, they brought weapons for the Syrian Kurds. They also brought weapons for Kurdish Peshmerga forces. For instance, the Germans, they were arming Iraqi Kurdish fighters with Milan systems, with rocket systems. So it's possible that they bring this weaponry, but it's not like that you're going to see these people walking in the streets and say, aha, this person is this, because they will probably wear civilian clothes. They will not look like military figures. I mean, there are some people that claim they have seen people, but that doesn't necessarily mean immediately that the decision is made that something like that will happen. But we saw something like that also in Syria in the past, when the US was thinking on looking for a local partner to fight ISIS. And then they actually had meetings in the province of Slemania in Iraqi Kurdistan with then it was called basically with the Syrian Kurds, to make it more simpler. With the Syrian Kurds, and then they decided to work with the Syrian Kurds to fight ISIS because they were a ground force, and then they were supported with airstrikes in Kobani, and they defeated ISIS in Kobani at the time in 2015. So basically, it will be a replication of, I don't know, I mean, maybe you can call it the Kobani model, that you have local fighters on the ground. Even in Kobani, there were no special forces on the ground. There was no operators on the ground. They just did everything by basically calling in airstrikes. So basically, just if they can call in airstrikes and they have support from the US military and the Israelis, I think they could push through very easily to the Kurdish areas. But then the question still would always be what you do with the rest of Iran. And what about the protesters? And actually the Kurds already, they have helped many protesters that fled the crackdown of the Jina Amini protest. Actually, these Kurdish opposition parties were helping them. So they also have links with Iranians that fled Tehran, and actually they helped a lot of them to safely leave Iran.
So, but what about the Kurdish fighters who fought ISIS and who have this huge prison camp full of ISIS prisoners and ISIS families? Recently, the Trump administration appeared to be abandoning them. And if that's the case, are there bad feelings that the Kurds have towards the Trump administration? If the Trump administration wants them to fight on the US and Israel's behalf against Iran, do they have to repair some of the damage in the relationships?
Well, I mean, the thing is that they were all like the Trump administration, also previous administration, not just the Trump administration. Like there was always this approach that this is just a transactional relationship with the Syrian Kurds. So the Iranian Kurds are very wary about that. Like they want to have some guarantees actually that they will gain some form of autonomy or some form of like local decentralization in Iran if they decided to fight and take on the regime. So that's part of the discussions basically. And I also talked with a Kurdish political party member, and that's what he was basically saying, that we want to have political guarantees. We don't just want to fight, and that in the end you will have some U.S. official, oh yeah, our partnership is just transactional. We both oppose the IRGC, and now you've done the fight, so thank you, bye-bye. So that's not what they want to repeat, this kind of experience what the Kurds in Syria had, that after they fought ISIS and they defeated the caliphate, then later they say, okay, now you have a new central government in Tehran and you have to work with them and you have to give up all your rights. So it doesn't mean that they want to, as I mentioned or before, they don't want to separate from Iran. They want to have an autonomous system, a federal Iran, a democratic Iran, a secular Iran, and they want to work with other Iranian opposition parties. They are not against that. But the thing is, they don't want to go in this fight without any political guarantees and then later to be crushed again by a new centralized government. Because we should also not forget, I mean, one of the Shah also, they have a very bad experience with the monarchists in the past in Iran, because who crushed the Kurdish Republic in 1946 when they had a sort of independent republic? It was actually the Shah, basically. So that's one of the relatives of Reza Pahlavi, who's now one of the opposition figures in Iran. Why he's in exile, basically. But go ahead.
Well, didn't Henry Kissinger make a deal with the Shah to sell out the Kurds?
Exactly. And then reportedly Henry Kissinger said something like, yeah, we're not doing... we are not, I forgot what he said, something like we are not doing humanitarian missions or something. I mean, he basically was saying we follow our interests. Basically, Kissinger said something like that, but I don't remember the exact quote, what Kissinger told Mullah Mustafa Barzani. But at that time, the Kurds were supported by Israel and the Shah to take on Iraq. But then I think there was a deal, and then they gave up on the Iraqi Kurds.
Right, and they got slaughtered, didn't they?
Yeah, their revolution failed then. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So there's a lot of history, a lot of bitterness, and the Kurds are, Peshmerga, I guess, those who face death. Is that what it translates to? Those who face death?
Yeah, that's what it translates to. Yeah, those who face death.
So they've been facing death on all fronts, right, for the longest time.
Yeah, I mean, the Kurds have always been ready to help the West in history. I mean, they helped the West fighting ISIS. They have helped the West also with other issues, like before there were also other jihadist groups before ISIS that they helped fight, and they fought the Saddam Hussein regime, the Ba'ath regime, and now they're ready to take on the Revolutionary Guard. So they have been always like a very willing ally to work with the West, but the West have not really been very helpful in giving them any sort of rights. Although, of course, here in Iraqi Kurdistan is still autonomous region. There's a Kurdistan region, and they have very good relations with the West. They have received a lot of support with the no-fly zone in 1991 and afterwards the creation of the KRG. But anyway, like the Kurds are a bit, they're a bit worried that what happened in Syria with the Syrian Kurds could also happen with the Kurds in Iran in case they will join the fight against the IRGC and the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Well, Wladimir van Wilgenburg, I thank you very much for joining us today from Erbil in Kurdistan.
You're welcome.
And again, I appreciate it very much. And again, I've been speaking with Wladimir van Wilgenburg, who's a journalist and political analyst specializing in issues concerning Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey, with a particular focus on Kurdish politics. He has covered several major battles against ISIS in northern Syria and Iraqi Kurdistan, among other subjects. And his latest book, based on first-hand research and interviews conducted on the ground in Iraqi Kurdistan and northern Syria, is The Kurds of Northern Syria: Governance, Diversity, and Conflicts. We're going to take a brief station break. We're back with an update on reports that Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the recently killed supreme leader with deep ties to the IRGC, has been anointed as Iran's new theocratic leader. Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Mohsen Milani, who is the Executive Director of the World Center for Strategic and Diplomatic Studies and Professor of Politics at the University of South Florida. Professor Milani has served as a fellow at Harvard, Oxford, and Foscari University in Italy, and is the author of The Making of Iran's Islamic Revolution. And his latest book is Iran's Rise and Rivalry with the U.S. in the Middle East. Welcome to Background Briefing, Mohsen Milani.
Thank you very much for your kind invitation.
Well, thanks for joining us. And of course, I want to talk to you about your latest book and the Cold War going back to, 1979, between the United States and Iran, which has now turned into a hot war. But let's touch on the news of the day here. There are reports that the Ayatollah Khamenei's son, Mojtaba, is going to succeed him, which I think alarms a lot of people. It's supposed to be announced today. Apparently they're leery of presenting him in public because of the Israeli strikes. The Israelis actually struck, what do they call themselves, the Council of Experts that were choosing a new leader. So I'm not sure exactly when we'll find out that Mojtaba Khamenei is the next supreme leader. What are you hearing, Mohsen?
I am hearing exactly what you have been hearing. I have absolutely no way of confirming it, but I know the New York Times ran a story yesterday by a very credible reporter that the son of the late Khamenei is the top choice of the Council of Leadership. And he's about, I believe, 56 years old. Again, if I'm not mistaken, his wife, one of his daughters, or perhaps a son of his, were also killed. And he has been groomed by the Revolutionary Guards for a long time to replace his father. He has always been connected to and supported by the IRGC. And at the same time, he had been extremely silent about his views. There is not much we really know about his political views. I've seen maybe one or two lectures by him, but I'm not aware of any interviews in which his political views are articulated. There is one school of thought that says he is as hardliner as his father, but there is another school of thought, and that comes out in the New York Times article, that he is Iran's MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, and that he is much more receptive to the reform than his father. But regardless of his political views, whoever replaces Khamenei is going to have tough time in two ways. One, how they're going to end this war, but also how he's going to deal with a very rebellious population at home. So we are really at a very critical moment in Iranian history. But the outcome of the war, I think, is going to determine the future of the Islamic Republic and the future of Iran for decades to come.
So why do you think then, Mohsen, that the Supreme Leader and his family, along with his son, Mojtaba's wife, Zahra Haddad-Adel, she was killed along with the Supreme Leader and her children, and so it's as though they deliberately wanted to be martyred because he was in his office. He wasn't in some hidden bunker. And my understanding is that the martyrdom of Mojtaba's wife and kids has actually improved his standing amongst the clerical regime. So walk us through that notion of martyrdom and how important it is to this revolutionary theocratic government.
I would agree with the second part of your question, that because his wife and his kids were killed, it gives him some degree of sympathy. I don't know whether he can translate that sympathy into popular support, but definitely there is that sympathy. But the first part of the question, I'm not very sure that we can explain that in terms of martyrdom. The concept of martyrdom doesn't mean you have to be stupid unless somebody come and kill you. I have no idea why they make that mistake, knowing that this is exactly the way Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, was killed, knowing that the attack could come at any time. Why he would stay at his office is beyond me. I cannot fathom this at this time. I cannot believe that he did this deliberately in order to be martyred. If this is the case, then we are really in Iran is in deep trouble. But I can tell you one thing. I think a more important question than why he stayed there, even if he knew that there is a possibility of strike by Israel and the U.S. Bigger question is, what is the logic behind going after the leader of the Islamic Republic? And I think I have the answer to that question. The thinking was that once we get rid of the head of the snake, the entire system that he has created will collapse. And I have serious doubt at this time whether this is going to be true or not. And that is why the Islamic Republic has quickly tried to choose a successor to Ayatollah Khamenei, if it happens to be his son, because they're sending a clear message that by cutting the head of the snake, the system is not going to disintegrate, collapse, and that it can survive. And I'll be more than happy later on, if you're interested, to tell you why this system was set up to become resilient and so durable.
Well, I think we should talk about that, because if this is beginning to look like a massive mistake, all I'm hearing is pretty pessimistic scenarios where it's just going to get worse and worse, both for Iran and the United States and for Israel. And I thought that what Secretary of State Rubio said the other day seemed to me to be fury on his part, that he went public saying that essentially Netanyahu dragged them into this war because he was about to strike, and then they had to join in to protect American troops in the region. It seems to me that that may well be what happened. Now, Trump, of course, tried to refute that to give Netanyahu some cover, but it looks as though that's what happened, that Netanyahu basically was literally about to pull the trigger, and he forced the U.S. into this war. And if that's true, I think it's going to have some pretty serious repercussions. But in general, everybody that I talk to suggests that, first of all, you cannot win a war with air power alone. And two, Iran is resilient and they are ready for a long war. And I'm not sure the United States is ready for a long war. Israel appears to be ready for a long war. So how do you see it?
Well, I'm not even sure that Israel is ready for a long war, because Israel is a small country, 9 to 10 million people. Iran is a country of 92 million people. And the Islamic Republic has been preparing itself for this confrontation for a long, long time. There are over 1 million to 1.5 million people who work at different capacities for the security and armed forces of the Islamic Republic. And unless the U.S. and Israel succeed in overthrowing this regime, completely overthrowing it, Iran is in fact hoping that they can turn this war into a long war. Because right now, frankly, the Islamic Republic is, I believe, at its most dangerous moment in the past 47 years. Because as I said, there is war, external threat, there is internal threat, and then there is that succession question. When you put them all together, it gives you a very frightening picture. But Iranian strategy in this war is based on 2 or 3 major assumptions or major objectives. Number one is to survive. For the Islamic Republic, if they can survive, they're going to claim victory, because their argument is that we're fighting against the greatest military power in the world, a superpower in the US, and the greatest regional military power in Israel. So they want to survive. Endurance is what they're counting on. Secondly, they want to make this a long war. And the reason why they want to make it a long war is because they want to inflict as much damage, as much cost, human lives, as well as in terms of price of energy, interruption of global shipping, and things of that nature, so that the U.S. Changes its strategic calculations about Iran. And thirdly, they want to regionalize and internationalize the conflict in order to, again, to put pressure on both Israel and the U.S. To come to an agreement to end the war. And finally, and the fourth point is as important as the other two, it's part of objective number one. Survival means they have to make sure that once the war ended, when it does end, the repressive capability of the Islamic Republic remains intact so that they can deal with internal rebellion. You know, there are reports that the U.S. is contemplating providing weapons and financial support to Kurdish groups. Now, if this information is accurate, if the reporting is accurate, and if the Kurdish, Iranian Kurds, decide to use violence inside Iran, the Islamic Republic is already preparing itself for that eventuality. So these are four main objectives that the Islamic Republic is pursuing at this time.
Well, there are reports that the CIA is arming the Kurds in the west. You've got the Azeris in the north, the Arabs in the south, and the Baluchis in the west. And the Baluchis, of course, have an independence movement as well. So you could see there's the potential for mischief on the part of the U.S. And even though the U.S. has tried to stabilize Syria, Israel prefers to have Syria broken up with internal strife. So I'm not sure whether that is Israel's objective vis-a-vis Iran, that it's a country that'll be riven with internal strife.
Yeah. Well, I think the objective, and I think that's also partly the objective of the U.S., is to create Iranian power. But going back to the Kurdish issue, back in 1973, from 1973 to 1976, a CIA, SAVAK, Iranian intelligence agency, and Mossad was formed. Iran provided financial and military support. The CIA provided logistical support and some money, and Mossad was also operational support. They supported the Iraqi Kurds in the person of Mojtaba Barzani in order to weaken Saddam Hussein. And the policy paid off. It paid off because finally in 1975, Saddam Hussein agreed to have a peace treaty or a peace agreement with the Shah of Iran. And at that time, a lot of people were unhappy with this agreement. But the point I'm trying to make is that this is not the first time that external powers are trying to use Kurds in order to achieve their own objectives.
But at this point, what seems to be happening is that U.S. and Israel are targeting the IRGC's facilities, the Basij barracks, etc., and police stations across the country. Is that a viable strategy?
Well, I don't think so. Frankly, I don't think so, because if they continue doing this, their assumption must be that they can weaken the Islamic Republic so much so that its opponents can take over. Well, when you destroy all these institutions, the only one that is going to remain viable is the IRGC. How many of them are you going to be able to kill? And don't forget, the IRGC, immediately after the American invasion of Iraq, changed its domestic structure. They were afraid that the U.S. is going to attack. They were afraid that the U.S. is going to deploy troops to Iran. So what did they do? They decentralized the command and control structure. In other words, they call that a mosaic strategy. Give total discretion and autonomy to independent groups, independent IRGC units in various parts of the country. And therefore, I think it is unlikely that once the war ends, it's the domestic Iranians can take to the streets and take over the government. What is a more likely scenario is some kind of either a failed state, in other words, the Islamic Republic becomes so weakened that it cannot have complete control over Iran, but still is strong enough to suppress its opponents. Or another possibility, the one that I am afraid of the most, and I think it's going to have serious, serious consequences for the region and for the US, is the possibility of a civil war along the line of what happened to Syria. And that is going to have destabilizing impact in the region for decades to come, not just for years, but for decades to come.
So just in the last couple of minutes, Mohsen, let's talk about your book, Iran's Rise and Rivalry with the US in the Middle East. This is a history of this long Cold War that we've had with Iran, and also prior to that, of course, you go back to the coup against Mossadegh, which clearly has destabilized the country and created all kinds of animus within the country itself. After all, in retrospect, Mossadegh seems like a Bernie Sanders, no great threat to anybody. But we've had a long history of meddling, and the book makes it clear that Iran transformed from a monarchy with few enemies to an Islamic Republic with few friends. And now, of course, it's completely isolated and being attacked relentlessly in a serious war, the outcome of which you just pointed out, we don't know, but most of the scenarios are pretty bleak.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for promoting the book. I appreciate it. The central theme of the book is the central question that the book answers are two. How did Iran manage to become an influential player in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and in the Arab-Israeli conflict? And remember, the book came out before the fall of Assad and before the killing of Hassan Nasrallah. And the second question the book answers is what Iran has done sustainable? Now, I explain how Iran became a major regional power. And I look at Iran and US rivalry in different countries, specifically in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and in Gaza. And then I explain how, despite American strategy of containment, despite 4 decades of sanctions imposed on Iran, Iran was able to undermine American interests in the region. And then at the end of the book, where I explain all of this, I answered the question I asked at the beginning. Is Iran's rise sustainable? And my answer was a decisive no. And I came out with 4 or 5 reasons, but 2 of them are relevant to what is going on today in Iran. I argued in that book that the Cold War that started between Iran and the United States after the taking of American hostages in Tehran in 1979 is a kind of war that Iran cannot win. That if Iran is interested in having any kind of major role in the region, it has to negotiate with the US. It has to come to an understanding with the US about its regional policy. And the second important issue I raised is that the Shah of Iran was overthrown in 1979 at the height of his power in the Middle East. He was by far the most powerful figure in the Middle East when he was overthrown. Why? Because internally he had difficulty dealing with his people. And in that book, I conclude by saying that unless Iran changes its regional policies, as well as domestic policies, opening up the system, addressing legitimate grievances of large segments of its population. Unless they don't do these two things, I concluded in the book, in the concluding paragraph, that Iranian rise in the Middle East will be remembered as nothing short of a short footnote.
Well, Mohsen Milani, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you very much.
And again, I've been speaking with Mohsen Milani, who's the Executive Director of the World Center for Strategic and Diplomatic Studies and a Professor of Politics at the University of South Florida. Professor Milani has served as a Fellow at Harvard, Oxford and Foscari University in Italy, and is the author of The Making of Iran's Islamic Revolution. And his latest book is Iran's Rise and Rivalry with the U.S. in the Middle East. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media. And our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another Background Briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
One more life.